Hey everyone, and welcome to the Incubator Podcast. I'm your co-host, Aaron Boyd.
And this is Sabir Saran. Today, we're really excited to have Theom on the call here. And Theom is a data and cloud security platform. And we're joined very excitingly by Navindra Yadav, who is the co-founder and CEO of Theom. Navindra brings an illustrious background as the founder of Tetration, currently under Cisco, and now has made his way on into founding Theom, as well as an exceptional number of patents. Let's call it over 190 patents to his name, and then more on the way. So thank you very much today, Navindra, to joining us here on Incubator. We're excited to have you.
So hopefully, Navindra, you could maybe take some time to introduce yourself for sure. We want your background, and then we really want to get into why Theom. From my perspective, as we get into it, we're gonna discover here together that Theom addresses some pretty interesting and very primary concerns, but it's built on something that has such vast applicability and growth potential, and hopefully we can cover everything. But can you start by explaining a little bit of your background and then getting into Theom, the value prop, and why you built it?
First of all, thank you, Satbir. Thank you, Darren. Excited to be here on Incubator. About my background, so like what you've already covered, I founded Tetration, large ingest of data into that Tetration cloud. And one of the things where I got this whole insight about thinking about Theom was we were ingesting 200 petabytes of data into Tetration. How do you keep all that data secure? So that was when all these light bulbs were going on. And before Tetration, I was at Google, INCMA, Cisco, so long back, and Bell Labs. So the story starts out of Bell Labs. And at Tetration, besides being the CEO of the company, I was also the CISO of the group. So odd combination of titles. And as the CISO, had the practitioner view into like, how do you keep all of this secure? And the primary thing that I observed there was find the asset that's most valuable, figure that out, and then see whether your controls are really protecting that asset. And if this asset moves around, the protection should move along with them, with the asset. And the asset happened to be, in our case, data. And I believe that's true with many other companies on this planet, and which is why the whole thing about let's go focus on data and start securing data and go from there.
Excellent. Thank you, Navindra. So, Navindra, one thing, can you tell us more as you founded Theom? Where is the company today in terms of, I believe, a seed round funding of over 16 million? How's that progression going in terms of the founding of the company and where the maturity is?
So we started the company predominantly 2021, end of 2020, but 2021 is really when we started working on this whole product. Raised capital late this year, just a few months ago. Like you mentioned, it was our seed round, got some illustrious investors inside Theom. So Microsoft, Ridge Ventures, these are two of the main investors in Theom. So product is now deployed at some customers. They are paying customers. Now we're actually ramping up our growth cycle inside. So it's like really on the hockey stick ramp. And our value proposition is really simple for customers. We'll tell you where your data breaches are in the cloud, and I can talk a lot more about it, but probably you have a lot more questions. So I'll follow your questions.
All right, that works. No, appreciate that. So you and your two co-founders, you started looking at this data space, and you started to already address some of the concerns. There's no obvious choke point for data when you get to cloud. We've proven, and breaches have proven that it's very difficult to track that data. So security controls, especially when you look at a CSPM space, a cloud security posture management, they tend to look at the infrastructure, whereas you're following the data, which is why the bodyguard, title comes into play. And then really one of the third problems we recognize, at least, is it's very hard to have provable security. And not only do you do those things, I can't wait to get into some of the architecture elements, because I think, again, with proof of action and soon to be state of proof. You're doing some foundational things that I think is going to transform a lot of different areas of cybersecurity. But can you walk us through those early days where you recognize some of the similar problems? I don't know if you've add on to those problems, and then how did you start going through the I guess the process of determining that this is something you could tackle?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I was mentioning, at Titration, we had this problem head on, and we were trying to use the classic CSPM tooling and so on and so forth to secure our cloud. We had all sorts of monitoring that we had put inside. We had the standard firewalls, SASE, and so on and so forth, who's accessing what kind of data and things. But the hard part was, like you mentioned, data gets copied, moved around. We were looking in one place, data gets copied, then what do? It's the same data and it leaks out from there. So that was one problem around that. The next problem was when you have vulnerabilities, let's say you're trying to patch these different vulnerabilities because there could be supply chain attacks or 0 days and so on and so forth. 0 days is yet another problem. But even known vulnerabilities, when you have that, which one should you prioritize? Take Log4j. Log4j came along December of last year or November of last year, and then you have to patch whole set of machines. Which one should you focus on? So obvious answer is the ones with the most critical data are the ones you should focus on. But again, how do you know which machines have got access to the right set of data and so on and so forth, which is more critical? I was facing these challenges along with my founders in Titration, and that's where the CISO practitioner view came in. I think that, okay, we have to solve this problem. Everyone else is also hitting these same issues. So why don't we actually go head on, solve this problem? And the way to go head on, solve this problem is start with the data. First, go front, put data front and center. Understand what data are you trying to protect? What's the business criticality of this data, whether it's moving around over APIs, message queues, or at rest, and then go from there.
Yeah. So why don't we dive into this a little bit? Because now let's start talking about where Theom comes in, because Theom is, I'm enthralled by what you've created for many reasons that are definitely going to become apparent on this podcast. So if we could now characterize what Theom does, from everything from how easy it is to connect, if you can talk a little bit of how you answer fundamentals like, hey, we don't pull your data out to do this analysis. Talk a little bit about that, and then get into, if you could, into the NLP classifiers. How do we find the data? What do we do with that? How do we determine what kind of metadata is associating with that on a continuous basis? Can you walk us through now, what does Theom do and how does it do it? And then we'll start breaking down some of those elements maybe.
Absolutely. Very excited to talk about that. So if I'm a CISO, when I put myself in the shoes of a CISO or my buyer, I think, okay, if I come as a startup and say, I'm going to take your data out of your environment, classify it, figure out all of this, it's a non-starter. Why would they trust me? And first of all, that's one question. The second thing is, I don't want to take that liability either of taking some customer's data on and then be liable to keep it secure and so on and so forth. So when we were starting Theom, one of the guidance to the teams was we don't take anything out of the customer's environment. All our, or their jurisdiction, wherever all our engines have to run in the customer's environment, that actually puts further burdens on you. You have to be highly cost sensitive, because if you're just going to take Amazon, for example, Amazon has this product called Macy. If you're going to just classify everyone's data and start doing all of that, costs, bills just shoot out. So the economics doesn't work. There's a reason why they're not seeing much traction or limited traction is what Macy is seeing, because the cost economics doesn't work. Same thing with my investor, Microsoft. They also have similar toolings, but cost economics doesn't work. So you have to be highly efficient in terms of cost, because there's an ROI that you need to talk to your customers about. Second thing is data doesn't leave their environment. So what Theom does is runs all of its engines, which is obvious inside the customer's environment, automatically discover where their data is. And when we do this, it's has to be done smartly, because if I roll back and say it's not just the Amazons, the Azures of the world, or the Googles of the world that we have to go protect the data there, we also have to protect data inside Snowflake or Databricks or these SaaS data stores. These are growing rapidly in the market. If you just look at all those data stores, so even inside Snowflake, our engines have to run inside Snowflake, not inside Amazon or Azure or so on and so forth. So wherever the data is, that's the model that we follow. our engines run there. And then what we've gone and done is build these engines that can do natural language processing on top of the data, because data comes in all shapes and forms. And if you can solve the unstructured data problem, the structured data problem just falls through and just becomes an easier case, subcase of unstructured data. So in NLP, why do we use NLP? Because someone may say the last 4 digits of my social security number are XYZ type thing. So we now need to look at the context and find, okay, these 4 digits actually talk about the social security number. So that's where NLP technology really comes in, looks at the context and says, okay, this is what that thing is, and starts decorating the data that I've found these types of entities inside this data.
Yeah. So that's really compelling view, Navindra, and to just have that visibility. Now, once that context, the magic word is giving your data that context, right? And how does an organization, if you're the CISO or just security organization, able to convey the risk of that asset that's discovered and correlate that context to a actual business risk? Like, this data is our crown jewels. And now, what is this data worth to us, right? And how is that correlation and thought process built by Theom?
Exactly. Thank you, Sadhbir, for that question. What we observed, and this is part of my own journey, was when I was a CISO, teams used to come back to me and say, okay, we need to fix this or this, but we don't have resources to do both. And can you prioritize? And my question back to them often was, what's the value? What's the business impact if we don't do X or we don't do Y? And they used to then start looking at the data and then try to establish, okay, this is what it means to the business. But it was very manual. You couldn't actually create work for figuring out what to do. So what Theom goes and does is, right out of the box, it tries to establish the value of the data for the business. We try to come up with and observe what is this data potentially trading at, or who's actually bidding what price in the dark web, and that gives us a signal about what this data's minimum value should be. We can't predict the reputational loss to the business in case that data gets leaked, but we come up with some number. Then we allow customers to use our APIs to tell us, oh, no, these type of entities in my environment are much more valuable. The business risk is higher for us, and so on and so forth. So now Theom takes that kind of insights back and looks at the data and then starts pricing the different data stores. So what that actually allows businesses to do, besides just taking categorical values like this is highly critical, it's got the PII or PHI or other categories like trade secrets and so on and so forth, besides just looking at things from that lens, they also get a business value to drive risk prioritization. Because at the end of the day, business leaders they need to drive their business, keep their business safe and functional. Security is a function that keeps, or the way I look at cybersecurity in general inside companies is, keep the business running, stay out of the way, let the business guys produce as much value with least amount of friction or breaks. So that's really how they should really look at the data and then prioritize things so that risks are eliminated.
Yeah. So let me read some of that back. So far, we've connected Theom to our environment. Yes. Theom goes in. We're going to talk about how. I want to get to Hedera because I think that's an important aspect eventually.
Yes.
So Theom is now connected to our environment. It's not taking any data out. It now goes and discovers all of your data stores across analytic stores, across object stores, across even in flight, right?
Yes.
Like things like RabbitMQ, APIs, et cetera. So it discovers. Now it uses forms of AI to classify what that data is. And because we have that, we can now assign values to it.
Yes.
How do you then take those the potential value and show where to a business a potential breach is in action or is occurring? Can you talk about the entities, the metadata associated with it, and how we track anomalies to accepted behavior? Because that's the other part of this. And so far, by the way, you haven't had to do anything. You've just had to connect Theom to your accounts. And all of this starts to take place. So that's another just incredible area. But can you walk through the other side of this, which is that continuous posture management and kind of syncing all of this together as a story?
Absolutely, Darren. Fantastic recap, as well as I'll give 2 examples to answer your observation. So take the first example, like anomalous behavior. How do we actually pick up there's a potential data leak happening right now in your environment? So what Theom does is, besides establishing the value of the data, discovering where the data is, let's take Snowflake as our example store. So Theom also looks at who's accessing the data. So studies users, roles accessing the data, and then finds out what's normal for this user. Let's say I'm the user of a particular database and a table. Theom will figure out, okay, what type of queries does Navindra and the role Navindra belongs to, what type of queries do they push into the system? How do they manipulate the data? How do they work with the data inside this particular table? So it does this per table inside the database or inside the warehouse of the data lake. And then Theom then sees the type of queries Navindra is issuing now. Is he going out of his typical profile? Is he accessing columns he does not, or the roles do not access? Is he doing operations with the data that are different in profile? I'll give you a couple of examples there. One is he aggregating? Is he aggregating data, going across multiple rows inside the table and aggregating and doing something different than the others? For example, just taking a row out of the data and just looking at some person's salary versus doing a median across the salary. So we pick up all of that classic behavior. Other things we look at is he accessing a masked field, which typically people don't with this particular role, the whole concept of dynamic masking and so on and so forth. Is he running some discovery patterns? Like, is he looking at which users access this particular table, changing the privileges of users? So Theom just keeps watching what Navindra is doing. And is this something that this role typically does? The moment we start observing that it's different, then we start analyzing, is this potentially a phishing attack that's happening, or is this a supply chain attack? Because it may not be Navindra. Maybe this is a service account that's accessing data. So we study service accounts also, and we profile service accounts. And service accounts always keep behaving in a very similar way. They don't actually change. Their guardrails are really tight. Is how Theom will create the guardrails for them. And if we see them deviating, we know there's something bad happening around here. And we start connecting into the SIM source platforms and start saying, okay, that's something that you need to watch. And this is the value of the data that's at risk, because this is the volume of data that's been pulled out. And we start reporting all of that to the insider threat team's dashboard so that they can take action. So this is reactive security, as in the breach was happening right now. Then there's proactive security. So you asked on both fronts, the hygiene part of this. So what Theom will also do is, a couple of examples here too. We look at how many people can access this table. Do all of these people need access to this table? There are only, let's say, 5% of the people who really need and use that access. So then Theom will recommend shrink wrapping permissions. That's proactive hygiene. Another example could be, we could say, okay, this data is highly sensitive and its access is public to the world. So maybe you want to actually go curtail your S3 buckets. You may want to actually encrypt the data, or maybe the Snowflake schema that this belongs to is public. So maybe even though you feel it's inside Snowflake, you've got all these IP address controls around the place, but it's public. You marked it public, so it's getting exposed out. So not just S3 buckets, Theom will look at all different data stores and just look for these patterns of improving the hygiene for the customer.
Yeah. This is really amazing, Navindra, because you're addressing themes from just overall cloud posture, cloud security, all things associated with data, the value of data, and then further with the identity side of things, right? Because not so long ago, and where Tetration originally started was on the user entity behavior analytics, profiling, data loss prevention, all of these things. So this is a beautiful way that that Theom brings all of this together. So just building on that identity aspect of things, right? So what Theom's done is correlated that identity with the data, the access, and all of those things. How does that play out in the marketplace today? Because there's also a trend in, or what we call cloud identity entitlement management. You've covered all of that ground in this single platform. So is there any reason why, or others might consider a point-specific solution that is lacking the context that Theom is providing? Just wanted to address that out there for our audience.
Absolutely. So customers may have products like CIEM platforms, like entitlement management, or may have products like CSPM. So where does Theom help them? So we get the context. We go all the way deep into data. So traditional CIEM platforms or CSPM platforms can only say, okay, at best, these cloud resources access, like computer resources access such and such data stores, and stop there. Inside, if I build an analogy to the real world, they can tell you that these people have access to your front door and they can open the front door. What they can't tell you, once they open the front door, what rooms do they access? What closets do they access? And inside the closet, what shelves do they go and what do they take out of the shelf? That's where Theom really comes in, because we go all the way into the data, the tables, the warehouses, the databases, tables, columns, cells. So we see all of that and we attach it back to the identity. And then we observe standard behavior. And then we say, okay, this seems odd, or maybe you don't need these kind of privileges, or someone is changing things. And if I dial back a bit, I've been in the security world for quite a while. So people used to, if you look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, there's a framework where people say, okay, these are the things that you look for in recon. There's a reconnaissance phase, and inside that whole kill chain, there are various phases that MITRE looks at different things. Most of MITRE has been built from an endpoint perspective, that someone gets into your network, does recon around in the environment. All of that is valid. But the same concept of MITRE ATT&CK framework also applies to data. So once the person hits the data store, or the bad person hits the data store, what do they do with the data? So that's where Theom starts watching. Oh, they actually are doing recon. And this is what I was trying to, in my previous thing, allude to. We see, oh, someone just issued show users from a headless account or a service account which is a machine or an application which constantly hits the same tables with the same type of CRUD operations. Now we can see that this particular service account is now doing show users, show tables, describe the schema of this table. So that's someone who's gotten in, who's actually doing recon inside the thing. So we pick up that behavior and say, you have a breach right now through this, and this is why we say sometimes through supply chain attacks or zero-day attack vectors, we can go and see pattern behavior changes and say, okay, this is where we add value. Now connecting it back to the SIMs and CIEMs and CSPM is we can now go to the entitlement management platforms and say, pull access from this guy, because now we are actually seeing broad range of data at risk, and you can either automate that whole process. So existing tooling becomes way more effective because we have got the context of data. That's really the short answer but I give a long-winded answer.
It's such a powerful answer too, because like Sabir and I talk about this often. Cybersecurity is independent of space and time. So in times of war or peace, this is a problem. In times of prosperity or scarcity, this is a problem. And in terms of abroad or domestic, this is a problem. And like, for example, if Navindra is accessing some information and he's entitled to it, that's fine. But when Navindra moves from California to Europe, maybe Navindra is not able to do that. And the fact that you can continuously assess is phenomenal. Without that context, it's like if we look at an S3 bucket, and if I protect the bucket and say, oh, check it out, this is not exposed publicly, have I protected anything? And I would argue you have not. You've gone a particular path and so far, but if I can take that data and just move it over here and do something with it, then arguably you have provided almost nothing in terms of value. So leading from the data out, I would suggest that this is what CIEM should be focusing on. Everything that you've created from that data out is exceptionally powerful, and to be able to do this continuously. And by the way, this is across vendors, partners, consultants, anyone in your supply chain. You have solved an incredible number of problems, and you've solved. Like, oftentimes we're so overwhelmed as security practitioners to even say, where do I start? How do I prioritize? And this starts to create that map of where to go. But then I'm going to say you go beyond that. And this is where I'm hoping we can spend a little bit of time. You go beyond that because you've also made some architectural choices that have cyber insurance implication, have audit implication. Can you walk us through a little bit? And I'm going to come back to, so far, the customer has not had to do much of at all, right? We're still in the conversation of, hey, you connected this. look what we can do. But can you talk a little bit about your choice of DLT and some of the blockchain choices? Because not only does it have implications on everything I just said, you made a claim earlier that, hey, we don't copy your data to do analysis. We don't move your data out to do analysis, but we have to do a lot of analysis, and we have to do it on the cheap.
Exactly.
You have solved all of these problems. Can you talk about DLT? Can you talk about proof of action? Can you talk about where that's going? Because I think this is going to have a massive implication for security organizations.
Absolutely. So DLT was something very interesting, and we thought like, okay, how do we use this to our benefit of our customers? And because people were asking us this question when we were designing this product and customers, like, okay, there were two places that we using DLT today inside Theom. One is on our interface, our management interface connected back to all these engines that are running in the customer's environment. What messages go back and forth from our management interfaces down to these engines which run in the customer's premises, to prove that nothing ever left their environment and nothing came from our environment back to them. So that's provability. And we hash every message that goes back and forth and record it into the distributed ledger, a form of a blockchain or a hash graph, that where we go record this so that it's immutable, can stand in the court of law. So that's one part. The other part where Theom uses DLTs is, as we're going through different things, observing different data stores, classifying the data, finding a risk inside a data store, and so on and so forth, we can also optionally record that as a proof of we detected this particular compliance issue, record it into the DLT. And when the issue was fixed, also report it into the DLT. What's the advantage of that? One of our customers asked us for this and said, okay, now when I go forward, I can prove to my auditors or my compliance people that we found issues and we fixed issues. So often compliance people or auditors, when they come in and they want to look at whether companies are improving their own processes and so on and so forth, proof of action needs to be shown. Here, everything is recorded into a DLT. Proof is there. Now, the DLT itself can be private to that particular company so that it's not exposed out. And this whole audit process, which takes months sometimes to get done, or 15 days and things, that can be optimized down. So use technology, use these building blocks in the right places. And that was what we thought was an idea that we could offer to our customers, to say, you can even record this into a DLT and you can have automated audits with the auditors.
I'm loving that. And can you explain to folks what the difference is with proof of action, where Theom can come back to you and say, yep, this is what we've done, versus state of proof, which I know is it's early days for state of proof, but can you explain the difference between those two and maybe the significance of that over time?
Oh, absolutely. So like I said, all of this is actually to reduce costs eventually for the business. How do you make businesses keep costs low, as well as get all the good put thanks to technology? And that's really where bringing in blockchain really works. And you can use really smart contracts. So in fact, we don't do this yet, but we've been toying with this idea in our minds, that people could even write their simple contracts on top of Theom and say, whenever these things get fixed, record this. So one is we detected this issue, a compliance risk or a risk, and then the customer fixed that risk. We record both of this. We can also build a contract around this thing, that when these three things happen, then record this so that they can drive their insurance premiums down. So that's where we wanted to connect it back, or we hope at some point of time, companies, if they do good hygiene work, they should actually get credit back from their own cyber insurance people to say, okay, I know you guys are doing all of this good work, so my premiums go down because they're investing in technology, doing all of the good stuff. So drive costs down for businesses who actually are doing it's like not giving an ad for Allstate, but Allstate used to say, if you're a good driver, or probably still does, we'll give you a discount on your premium. So something similar with the cyber insurance industry. What I observed in my own startups, two of them building them, was when I was taking cyber insurance, I just filled that form out. Okay, check. And then they just give you no one audited our system. No one even looked at, okay, are these guys doing the right hygiene? So I assume there are many startups that don't really have a cybersecurity grounding. So we're all lumped together, and it's just your bracket of your insurance, and everyone pays the same high premiums. Basically, the premiums are getting averaged on. But if I do a good job around managing my risk, I should get some savings back. And that's really what the philosophy here is.
Yeah, I love this. I love that because it speaks to a lot of the tenets that we talk to our customers about. Wherever possible, we want to self-fund. So if we're introducing something new, can we retire something out of your environment, and can we pay for it out of that retirement? That's one aspect. But riding commodity curves, making improvements that can have benefits of this nature are all things that are important to us. I love that you've been thinking about this all the way through, including I've seen some bold claims. I won't put it out there, but including how little a cost burden for all this processing you introduce to an environment. It is exceptionally low because you've made all of these upfront decisions and they all scale beautifully. So I love all of that. Now, if I may, we've talked about this in the past. There's another element that I think is just absolutely pivotal to what you do, which is not only have I classified your data, not only have I determined who's accessing and what they're doing with it, not only have I built something that can follow the data, I can also see, and this is really fun, I can also see how you're accessing that, what APIs you're accessing that data. You can contrast that to a spec to say, hey, you actually, like, all sorts of things. We can say things like, do you know you're accessing on something you thought was deprecated? Do you know that you thought you exposed 2 field types? You're actually, we're pulling down 5. Like, the implications of how you access data is also an incredibly phenomenal element, because we know that API attack surface is one of the greatest attack surfaces out there, starting last year. Can you talk a little bit about the value of that piece as well? Because you just keep giving.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we observed is data at rest. If you want to protect data sits at rest. Data also moves around through message queues and APIs. So that's where APIs come in. Okay. Now, what our customers started asking us, okay, you've got these APIs, and we were using our own experience also. We've got these APIs. I have a Swagger spec to document my APIs. That's very standard inside the new age. Everyone documents Swagger specs, their APIs in a Swagger spec so that other teams can do development against that and all of that good stuff. How do we use that spec and compare what's actually happening in the code? So as things get deployed, Theom starts learning what type of payloads do different APIs carry. What's the spec, and compare it against the spec, and then see, okay, are these guys doing the same thing what their spec says? Are they deviating away from their spec? If yes, how significant is that? Again, you can put policies around this and say, and the benefit of this is shift left security. If a bug leaks through and a security bug leaks through, it's way more expensive to fix it in production when it's actually leaking out data and so on and so forth, as compared to fixing it and catching it really early in the dev cycle. And that's really what we are trying to solve for here by actually looking at the spec that the team has, or what's been published, what's been approved by the security people who reviewed the API specs and said, okay, these are things that I'm okay exposing out. The privacy people, the security people, a whole bunch of stakeholders could be there who've approved the specs. Theom looks at that, looks at what's happening in production or even in the staging environment, and then says, oh, you're deviating away from your spec. If it's a significant deviation, we can build stoppages so that the problem gets fixed and the issue doesn't propagate further. So things like that. Then the other thing we've been able to do is compare two different environments. You've got APIs in environment A and APIs in environment B. What's the difference between them? How did this change over time? So a lot of that historical information comes in. So you could see, okay, these APIs are changing, and the data that they're actually carrying, the value of data, the cardinality of entities suddenly changed. So maybe there's something interesting here, and so on and so forth. A lot of good insights come out from there.
Every time I talk to Navindra, I get all sweaty. There's so much coming out of this. I get sweaty.
It is an extremely powerful platform. Navindra, as maybe a last or parting thought, we talked about everything that the goodness of Theom exists out there. And when we talk about action, this is just kind of covering the bases. Theom integrates with, SOAR, your SIM, SOAR kind of integration platforms. Choose your poison, if you will, and get it done. anything to cover about the action side of this or integration side of that side of things?
Absolutely. I'll just touch on it briefly. So SIM source, like you mentioned, we connect into that. Inside the SIM source, now we're building different apps on the more classic SIMs or the more popular ones, where we can drive workflows for insider threat teams. So they can actually see what kind of data is actually leaving their environments, and so on and so forth. So different apps connecting so that all this information gets enriched there. Security professionals don't have to come to Theom's dashboard. Just keep watching the tools that you're familiar with or your workflows are. So consume Theom's insights in your existing tooling. We're also integrating with or have integrated with ITSM platforms like the ServiceNows. Some people prefer to see tickets in their ticketing system rather than go there. We leave it to the customer and their choice. Pick your workflows. We'll integrate with your existing tooling and then take it from there. But it's a very important point, Sadhbir. Like I learned this with Titration and my own security team when I started hiring that into Titration. They had a certain mindset. They operate in a certain way. Pushing new tools on them, it's a hard lift to teach everyone, get them comfortable with it, and so on and so forth. And then you're burning resources too. Everything comes back into save money for the company. What's the ROI you're getting out of a certain thing? So why change someone's workflows if you can actually integrate into their workflows?
Yeah,
that's
beautiful.
Philosophy.
Well, Navindra, we have taken an extraordinary amount of your precious time here. Wanted to thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast. And again, very compelling platform. We're lucky to have you, and looking forward to sharing this with our audience and other clients out there.
Thank you, Sadhbir. Thank you, Darren. Fantastic conversation. I loved every single minute of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.